So today we're going to be talking about the H factor. What is the H factor? As in letter H, H stands for honesty, humility, and it is the signature factor in the HEXACO personality model, which differentiates it from other models such as the five-factor model. This factor is also one of the main reasons for why I prefer HEXACO over other personality models, because you don't really see anything like it anywhere else, and it's an extremely useful thing to consider about other people, as we will see. So what exactly is it? Basically, honesty, humility is a measure of how fair, sincere, and honest a person is, uh, how much they avoid wanting to manipulate others for personal gain, how much they want to treat other people as people, how much appreciation they have for things beyond themselves. So that's what the main theme that goes around this particular factor. It's wanting to be completely fair, wanting to sorry, I'm stumbling. So I'm going to talk about the different facets because it's going to make it more obvious. This factor is like a glob of stuff that follows this very definite pattern. And once we go through these subfactors, then the pattern is going to be a lot more obvious to you. So there's for all 6 of the factors, the makers of the model separated things into 4 subfactors. So the first subfactor for honesty, humility is sincerity. Sincerity measures how genuine a person is, how much they can avoid wanting to flatter others, how much they can avoid wanting to obtain favors. Sort of, it's this is like the Machiavellianism or anti-Machiavellianism subfactor, sincerity. Then the second subfactor is fairness. Fairness is about being able to avoid fraud and corruption. Do they want to treat do they want to hold others to the same rules they hold themselves, basically, is what fairness is about. If they score low on fairness, then they're willing to gain by cheating or stealing, whereas high scorers are unwilling to take advantage of other individuals or of society at large. The third subfactor is greed avoidance, and greed avoidance is the ability to resist wanting to have a lot of lavish things, lots of money, how much they can avoid caring about their social status, how much they can avoid caring about wealth and privilege, whereas people who score low on greed avoidance are, as you would no doubt have guessed, people who are all about social status, all about personal wealth, all about want, all about having as much as they possibly can. The fourth subfactor for honesty, humility is called modesty. Modesty is basically how much they can avoid having an over-exaggerated view of themselves. If they score really low on this, then they'll consider themselves to be superior and entitled. They'll want their personal group to have more privileges, more status than other groups. If they're low in this factor, then whatever race they are, they'll want that to do better. They'll believe it's superior, or their gender, or whatever other cultural identifier they might have. That those identifiers are going to, in their mind, make them superior to other people, and if it's combined with lowness on a few other subfactors, then they'll want to have more power for themselves, more power for their in-group. Whereas people who are high in modesty tend to they tend to favor egalitarianism. Well, generally speaking, and there's different degrees and gradations to all these, but they'll if they score high on modesty, and also just more generally if they score high on the honesty humility factor itself, then they'll want to favor democracy, because democracy is something that gives everyone, ideally, a fair say in what is going on in their country or in the world. And so high honesty, humility, and high modesty will generally tend to favor systems that give power to as many people as possible. Whereas if they score low on honesty, humility, then they will want to favor systems that are hierarchical, that have dictators at the top, possibly themselves at the top if they can manage it, authoritarian regimes, things where there's a huge amount of social dominance that's characteristic of extremely low H societies. Is when you see things like dictatorships and authoritarian regimes, the Taliban, and so forth. Russia is a prime example of what a low H society looks like, where at the other end of the spectrum, on high H, you would have the Nordic countries, which are all about democracy. Trust is... trust in government in Nordic countries is the highest in the entire world, so that's a mark of a high H society, so you can think of like that, and Russia as being at opposite ends of the spectrum. So there's actually some political models that the H factor correlates with. With one of the psychological political models, what's called social dominance orientation as a measurable factor. Social dominance orientation and right-wing authoritarianism are like the two main factors for politics, and social dominance orientation is the one that goes with the H factor. So social dominance orientation is just a measure of how much people want their own in-group to be superior to other groups. I mean, whatever their identifier is. If white supremacy, that's an example of high social dominance orientation. They'll favor dog eat dog world, don't have any respect for democracy, that kind of thing. And the H factor negatively correlates with social dominance orientation quite strongly, meaning that if someone, as someone moves higher and higher in the H factor, they'll move lower and lower in social dominance orientation. And another model that sort of goes with the H factor is what's called the World Values Survey. The World Values Survey is this organization that profiles the values politically of different countries around the world, and they have their own two-dimensional political model for where these countries fall relative to each other on those values. And let's see, with World Value Survey, there's two. There's traditional versus secular values, which is one axis, and there is survival values versus self-expression. That's the other axis. So the way they represented as traditional versus secular is the y-axis, and survival versus self-expression is the x-axis. And I'm not going to go too much into the World Value Survey because it is a different model than the topic of this current series. I mean, eventually I'm sure we will talk about that in another series, but right now, since I'm only focusing on HEXACO, I'm only going to be talking about the parts of the World Value Survey that have to deal with that sort of carry over into this model. So the H factor goes with the survival versus self-expression factor in the World Value Survey. And that factor in the survey is basically what measures how democratic the society is, how much trust they put in their people, how democratic they are, how many powers they give to their citizens. It also measures how much the country prioritizes things relating to the rest of the world, such as taking care of the environment, and other things of that sort that are sort of the want to set themselves up to sort of make themselves harmonize better with the rest of the world. And specifically the direction on that factor I'm talking about is self-expression, how much people in a country are allowed to do, basically how much they're allowed to partake in government. That's the self-expression direction, or positive Y direction as they have it on their own, or sorry, positive X direction as they have it on their own model. And that is the particular factor that correlates with the H factor in HEXACO. High H means more self-expression. Now the labels for the World Value Survey may seem a little bit strange, and that's just because with factors in models like that, as well as in factors in HEXACO, they're basically big globs of stuff that all correlate with each other. It's not one thing. It's a lot of different things that all relate to each other. And when people are designing models like this and trying to label their globs of stuff, they have to call it something so they can refer to it. So the title that they might give to that glob of stuff, it's sort of like the best they can do. And survival versus self-expression is probably not what I would have named the thing. I'm not actually sure what I would have named it, but I think it probably does a decent job. I probably would have called it something like democratic values or egalitarian leaning values, or something like that. But they decided to call it survival versus self-expression, I think, because they wanted to relate it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Anyway, that's sort of enough about the World Value Survey, because that's a different model from the topic of this own series. But you can kind of see how the H factor relates to that, because people who are high in the H factor, they'll want to treat others fairly and sincerely. They'll see others as real people, and at the same time, they'll want to harmonize with others as much as possible, because they'll be humble. They'll want they don't see themselves as being entitled to privileges. They want everyone in the world to have as fair a shot as possible. So, with political leanings in the U.S., obviously, liberals generally tend to be a bit higher in the H factor than conservatives, and it's fairly obvious that this has to be the case, because liberals are the ones who favor democracy. They're the ones who favor letting in immigrants. They're the ones who favor wanting to manage the environment, who favor taking care of the homeless, who favor increasing the minimum wage so that people can make a living. All those things go together. They're the product of high H. Now, within politics, it's interesting to note that there's more going on than the H factor. As I mentioned in the political models I talked about earlier, they both had two factors and not one. And as we'll talk about in a later episode, um, the the personality factor that goes with the second factor in those political models is the openness to experience factor. So openness and honesty, humility are basically the two personality factors that have to deal with different living situations, how they manage the living situations for themselves in the country, and when people want to find friends, when they want to meet people, they'll generally try to fill their social groups with people who have roughly the same openness to experience and honesty, humility scores as they do. Well, I mean, they don't look at it in terms of scores, but basically people who are close to their same position on those continuums as they are. If someone is very low in honesty, humility, for example, if they favor the dog-eat-dog world and want to get better for themselves, then they're going to have their friend base be other people who have that same particular schema or paradigm. And the same goes for openness to experience. So you can look at those two as being the survival dimensions. Well, survival in the sense of survival situations. So now there's one final thing I wanted to talk about is the different degrees and gradations of honesty, humility. So I realize I've been talking about a lot of other things besides honesty, humility in this episode, and that's just because it's a whole on it. It bleeds over into everything else. It's a very important factor. It carries over into all manner of other things. So just pardon that. And if you're having trouble following it, then just watch this a few times, or do your own research or whatever. I'm doing my best here because it is a very complicated, nuanced thing. That the other factors aren't quite as nuanced as this. I mean, openness is probably almost as nuanced, but the H factor is like a really complex one. Anyway, degrees and gradations, which is the final thing I wanted to talk about. Actually, so hang on, I need to get out my notes for that. So, I've sort of done my own conceptual head model of these 6 personality factors, and using some of my own research and just some logical thought processes and some personal experience. And I've taken the continuums for the factors and sort of divided them into different regions. Now, I need to be clear here that the regions are really just imaginary. They're just sort of like, oh gosh, how to say it's basically like being on a road and just like noticing what part of the road is relatively different from the stuff surrounding it, and you mark that in your head as being sort of like its own thing. That these are just like broad regions to help people sort of understand the continuum. So I've given numbers to these different regions, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. But since it is all on a continuum, you can have people who are like 2.5, 2.72, and so forth. So the regions, when I make a statement about a certain region in the continuum, it's basically just a very broad statement, and it like refers to the very center of that region. And of course, people, they can exhibit characteristics from multiple regions in the same continuum, and they usually do, the same as you would see with spiral dynamics. And another thing is, well, that the H factor is a bit of an exception here, but generally negative numbers don't mean bad. They just mean rotated 180 degrees from something else, such as west instead of east, or south instead of north, or down instead of up. That's the meaning of the negative sign. It doesn't mean bad. Oh, sorry, I need to get some water. Now, the age factor is probably a bit of an exception, just because, you know, the minus scores for the age factor can have some really, really terrible people, but I'm mentioning that point here anyway because for the other factors, at the very least, there's pluses and minuses, or advantages and disadvantages to being anywhere on the continuum. I mean, you can kind of see that with the H factor, because for being low on H, I mean, it makes them this Machiavellian, deceitful sort of monster of a person, but at the same time, the obvious advantage to that is that they'll be more concerned with their own survival. They'll probably do better in the world, especially with the way the current society is set up. So I suppose you could consider that a plus. Putting their own survival over others means they'll probably tend to survive more. Anyway, now getting to the regions themselves. So starting at the low end, -3, which is the narcissist. So the narcissist is someone who is utterly convinced of their own self-importance. They believe themselves inherently superior to other people. They're fully lost in themselves. Donald Trump is a really great example of what a narcissist looks like. He'll do anything for himself. Truth doesn't matter. Up is down, black is white. He doesn't care. He'll lie, say absolutely anything to make himself look better. Just the way he goes about everything, it's all about him, trying to take over as much as possible, trying to get as much attention as possible. Now, in the case of Trump, there's a few other factors at play. He's also high in extroversion, and extremely low in the openness factor. But still, you can really see the clear, very low H-ness, just as an example with Trump. Moving up a bit, -2, which is power seeking, and power seeking is just people who are interested in power, look at everything as being just nothing but game pieces. People who don't really care about rules, they just want themselves to get ahead. Oh gosh, trying to think of examples for this particular region. Vladimir Putin is probably, he's in between -2 and -3. He's extremely low in H, although it's probably not quite as much as Trump, at least in my own estimation. Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, or president, prime minister, I think they actually call him president. Anyway, he would be in between -2 and -3. People who they're more about power than self-image. I mean, of course, they're about both, but if they're -2, then it's more just about, it's more pure survival, wanting to put their social status above other things, and they'll probably view it as being a little bit more important than their own self-image, because self-image is something that is, if you view the low H direction as being sort of like a tier, then the self-image is usually something that's managed a bit after survival. People in -2, they're more pure survival, just social status, rigging the game for themselves, that kind of thing. Moving up to -1, we have people who are self-interested. So self-interested, they're not quite as dangerous as -2 or -3. They're mostly just people who they'll usually follow the rules. They'll usually try to play by the same game, but they'll definitely have a higher opinion of themselves. They might be kind of hard to be around. They're definitely kind of annoying. They'll often brag about stuff. They'll take certain steps to make sure they get more things than other people, more power and prestige than other people, want to climb the social ladder, that kind of thing. But generally they're going to follow the rules. They're not going to go out of their way to break a whole lot of things. They might seem shallow. They might seem a bit self-obsessed, but not as much as -2 or -3. So now moving up to the balanced state, which I just call survivalist, not to be confused with the survivalism of -2, because survivalist in the 0 region case basically just means sometimes they'll behave in a high H way, sometimes they'll behave in a low H way, and it all really depends on what's going on. So the general orange environment is somewhere between 0 and -1. They'll treat other people fairly when it suits them. They'll take advantage of people when it suits them. Living just sort of well, I think you get the idea for the 0 state. It's like the business world. The business world is probably a little bit low H leaning, but still mostly 0-ish. For business, ideally you want to treat people fairly, but at the same time, you are running a business. So, you have to take certain steps to make sure that your business can survive. And doing practices that might promote your product in ways it not really is, occasionally trying to fluff up yourself, but when you can get away with it, since you do want your customers to come back, obviously you want to treat them fairly. So there's two things are working in tandem. So the business world sort of survivalistic, 0-ish. So now moving into the positive region, +1, which I call fairness-oriented. So fairness-oriented basically just means prioritizing the rules, wanting everyone to be well taken care of, wanting everyone to be doing well. Let's see, trying to belief, often this manifests itself as like just belief in the rules, but not so much in a bluish way, more belief in the rules in just making sure that that there's a system where people can get what they need from the system so that they can survive. Trying to a little bit of an emphasis on trying to be harmonious with other people. A sort of a belief in community, wanting to have a community, a real community that's designed around, the sake of community as opposed to just promoting yourself, that kind of thing. So that's fairness oriented. +2 is egalitarian. Egalitarian just means there's no center of power. The power comes entirely from the people and no one but the people. So belief in no social group is better than any other social group. Wanting to help the world as the first case, instead of yourself, help the world. It's more than just about your own society. It's about everyone. Let's take care of everyone. So there's sort of greenish way of going about things. wanting to well, I think you get the idea for that one, because I sort of talked about this one before with the world value survey and so forth. So now moving up to +3, which is honesty absolutistic. Honesty absolutistic is people who are completely incapable of lying. They it's often the H factor, but taken a bit too far. They're sort of like honest to a fault. Autistic people commonly are found in this particular region. It's really not understanding why people would want to use other people. They don't understand low H at all. They just want to be as helpful as possible to absolutely everyone. That kind of thing. And also this +3 is of course the one that is the most likely to get taken advantage of, especially if they do happen to be autistic. So those are the regions that I developed. Of course, I could do more in either direction, but since they're like 3 standard deviations plus and minus, it's not a whole lot of point because you don't find too many people outside those ranges. So it's probably an infinite continuum. We could take it arbitrarily far in either direction, but for the human case, there's the 7 regions that I did give are they should be more than enough. So that's the H factor. In the episode that follows this one, I'll be doing the emotionality factor, which is what the E stands for in HEXACO. So yeah, that's all for now.